Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good.
Good. People will obviously start joining. I told Jimmy last week that we would have 20 minutes with him um, to 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 pick your brains, Jimmy, about what's going on in terms of the AI, this Cambrian explosion of apparent intelligence.
Mm,
The I just wanted to say that, or to start by saying that in 2001, Wikipedia was born. So almost 25 years, right?
yeah.
And the one of the reasons why we thought of you for this conversation within the context of what we're doing within synthetic research is that the way at least I and Hugo have always looked at Wikipedia is like these billions of brains, right? Which is us
Hmm.
probing deeper and creating knowledge that is then shared amongst everyone, right? But we're talking about a framework that you created that has explainability and verifiability at the heart, right? Which is very different from what's happening right now. And so I would just tee it up this way, and ask you that first question with regards to with synthetic data becoming increasingly prevalent in every in the web, throughout the web. How do you see it affecting the integrity of this framework that you've created, this platform of this of Wikipedia?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's always been very important for Wikipedia, for Wikipedians, people in the community, is the idea of reliable sources. We look for sources that are high quality. And what does that mean? Well, it's pretty old fashioned in a way, right? We look for newspapers that have sort of a long track record of sticking to the facts. We look for academic research that's peer reviewed. We look for, there's all kinds of markers of quality that we all already know about. You definitely want to see a newspaper that runs corrections, for example. When they get something wrong, they say, oh, look, we got this wrong. And what we're seeing today is obviously a big explosion of new sources of information, new websites, and so on. Some of them very low quality. Now, obviously, that's nothing new. That's been going on for quite some time. But with the possibility now of large language models sort of spewing out huge amounts of fairly plausible content, there is a new danger that we might be taken in by something that seems like it's of good quality but isn't, which I think is in general going to reinforce a lot of traditional brands, and also is a big risk for some traditional brands if they lean too quickly into large language models that hallucinate. You could really lose the trust of our community if you're publishing, complete nonsense. But it's an interesting thing to think about for wider, sort of for the wider general public, as you just are using a search engine and going around the web, and um, you see content that is apparently high quality but isn't. I mean, there are other signals of quality, one of which is just being decently well written, because in the past, people who could reasonably write well, and people who were just like crazy idiots, they sounded very different in many, many cases, right? But now something can be written that's very, very plausible, that just isn't true at all. I mean, one of my favorite examples I like to give is I ask ChatGPT, who is Kate Garvey, my wife, and I get a different answer every time. It's all plausible. The things that the hallucinated Kate Garvey has done are often similar to what my wife has done. And then I ask, and who did she marry? And that's always very amusing. It's rarely me. But again, it's plausible people we know in London, and so on and so forth. So, that's the sort of thing. If this gets published somewhere and it looks like a perfectly decent website, somebody could be duped by that quite easily. In this case, it's all pretty harmless, But I think it is a concern that we should have, about, I actually think Google should be really very concerned with this problem because, they index the entire web, and they'll link to websites that look plausible. And if lots of other people link to things that look plausible, it starts to look even more plausible, even though it's, hallucinated. So.
Yeah. Hugo, do you want to go?
Wasn't that already an existing problem even before generative AI came into play? That you had those content mills that was just churning out content.
For sure.
With this, I know that the volume that now is allowed because of these kind of systems kind of changes the game a bit, but that was already a challenge.
I mean, definitely. I mean, there have been sort of very low end content production companies that would just crank out large volumes of content by paying people very small amounts of money to just churn out a lot of words. That business model has definitely been disrupted by this. I don't know if they're going out of business or making more money because they now can do it very, very cheaply. But yeah, of course, and this idea that our community needs to judge the quality of a source is always been with us. You really do have to, as soon as you start thinking, the first time you think of, oh, let's just use sources from the web, really, if the next thing on your mind is, yeah, but there's a lot of nonsense on the web, how do we figure that out? Then you're missing, something really important.
Yeah, one aspect that I found interesting in recent, particularly online. I leave LLMs because it's my role, so I tend to be in spaces where people are using a lot of products around this area. And one product that I think kind of overlaps with Wikipedia in some sense, and that goes against one of the challenges of generative AI, which is there's no sources, there's no way. And I imagine I'm going for Perplexity. So Perplexity, it's an app that essentially generates articles on the fly for any question that we might have, and that they are sourced. I have some questions with Perplexity because I think they don't do exactly the point that you mentioned, that the sources that they use are not filtered to the degree I would expect to have really good answers. So sourcing is really, really core to this. How do you see the impact of products like those in what is the main goal of Wikipedia, which is essentially to not crystallize, because it's always a dynamic movement. Any article has a lot of life within it because of the contributors, but essentially kind of helping people make sense of the world when you can get a really narrow, precise question that sometimes you would probably need 15 minutes on Wikipedia jumping from one to the other. Do you see it as competing models?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very interesting, and I think there's a couple of things we can look at there. So first, one of the things that I'm looking at is, when you talk about the Wikipedia corpus of knowledge, which is importantly humans in the loop, and there's a lot of debate and discussion about really details, particularly if it's a thorny issue and a complicated topic. There's a lot of chewing on that and thinking about that and so forth. And there's also a restraint around not just hallucinating things we don't know much about, right? We just don't have it if we don't know anything about it and we don't have any sources. And yet, I do think there's something really interesting in using this technology in a more restrained way. So, I mean, one of the concepts is a large language model which simply understands your question and then returns information from Wikipedia. So our search experience on Wikipedia is pretty basic, right? You just go and you type, it's very old fashioned. It's just a database and it has keyword searching and a little bit of ranking, and it works perfectly fine because generally what people type into our search engine, although these things are chicken and egg, like people have trained themselves. You don't go to Wikipedia's search engine and type a long, complicated question. You just go chemistry.
Item one,
or,
yeah.
Or
Alan Turing.
Yeah, Alan Turing, right? But it's not that hard to. Actually, one of our developers, and this is a while ago now, just threw something together over a weekend, just as a proof of concept, where using ChatGPT, he first fed you could type any question, and he fed it to ChatGPT and say, what are some possibly relevant Wikipedia entries? And then he fed in those entries and said, can you find, some facts to throw that answer that question, and the links, bam. And you're like, oh, okay. So you could type, why do ducks fly south for winter? And that's a good example of a question. Well, Wikipedia tells you somewhere why ducks fly south for winter, but it's probably in a duck migration article or article about ducks or bird migration. And it also, it may be written at a level that doesn't correspond to your question. You can imagine being much more subtle, to say, like, why do ducks fly south for winter? That's a question that everybody might have. A child could have that question. What is why is the departure date of the such and such later than the such and such? I don't know. You can make whatever you want.
Yeah.
Or ask a more technical question. Well, you could get back a more technical answer, and that would be fine. So I think the technology to improve our internal search is potentially quite powerful. And then, we don't normally think much about competition and competitors because, we're just a community that we like making an encyclopedia, and we're happy people love it. But obviously you do have to think about those kinds of things and to say, look, what is the mode that people are using? And I think that for a very long time now, still, there's going to be an enormous value to the grounding that really so far only humans are really good at. Large language models can maybe ground in something that humans wrote, but they're not very good at sort of going out and doing new research and things like that. And so, our real human in the loop, like when we think about, how could we use large language models to help our community? What are some of the things that, it'd be nice if you could do with a large language model? And so I have these ideas like, a constant job that's constantly reading Wikipedia entries. And then you're asking the question, help me find popular articles that also seem to be very biased. Right. So large language model, you wouldn't say now fix the bias because they're probably not good enough for that, but they're probably good enough to make a tool like that pretty useful so that a volunteer who's like, oh, yeah, I know a lot about this area. What are some things I should? Oh, OK, yeah, that looks quite biased. I'm going to go in and work on that. And that human in the loop is really, really important to us. And I think will add value for a very long time to come. And of course, there's sort of stepping back. I mean, it won't be great for Wikipedia, I suppose. But if we get to the point where large language models are actually better at everything that Wikipedians do than Wikipedians are, well, we might be in a different world. I suspect where we'll be is in the world of chess, right? Where chess engines are far better than any human player, but people still like doing chess, right? They didn't stop. And so I think that we'll still just sort of knock along enjoying debating our things and writing things out and feeling, sort of that we are contributing to grounding large language models and AI and sort of as humans saying, hold on a second, you've been reading too much of your own output and you've gotten yourself confused. So
go
Kwame. I'm a product person, and when I hear about something, I tend to go on a drift. And you were describing that experience of maybe consuming Wikipedia, but through more of a LLM chat-like interface that would take queries or more formed questions. And I was thinking, you mentioned one example, which was kind of adjusting the tone, adjusting the depth. But I was thinking that it could be really useful for multi-op question, so that you need to go through 3 or 4 or even more Wikipedia articles to form that answer. That is where I feel it could be really, really useful. So navigating, traversing through Wikipedia to get.
I think that's right. And
meta article.
There are definitely there are a lot of questions you might have which might not be answered. I should come up with an example so I can sort of explain this to other people. But I think we've all had the experience of you go to Wikipedia and you click through 3 or 4 articles and read a lot of different paragraphs. Maybe it's because you went to the wrong article to start with, or maybe it's because this article should have had that but didn't, and I had to go deeper to find it. But in some cases, it's like, no, actually, I need a little bit of context here and there. Exactly. Sort of what happened to Alan Turing. If you don't even know who Alan Turing is, you probably need to have that explained to you first, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe cryptography is one of the pages that needs to be consulted for you to have a well-rounded view of who Alan Turing is. And maybe, and because the way Wikipedia is structured, cryptography by itself won't be extensive within the Alan Turing piece. So it might need to do that kind of
no, I mean, I mean, for something like Alan Turing, if you just say, tell me about Alan Turing, we better get that right in the one article, right? But it's where you're sometimes crossing the lines of a few articles that could be quite interesting.
One last question, Jimmy. I know that the news is very much centered to your existence. You had a number of incursions into, how can we make the news better? How can we get to the truth? How can we get the truth out there, right? Quicker. Wikipedia was, you guys decided not to go with ads, and it was probably the best thing ever. The news. I remember actually being at Davos with you and Bill Gates kind of giving you the evil eye at some point. But it's turned out for the better. The news in its all complexity hasn't, right? Because most of it has embraced an ad-based monetization system. How do you see this kind of AI world going towards? How do you see it kind of navigating this dilemma, right?
I mean, it's very interesting because at least sort of in the initial run, we're seeing quite a lot of paid subscription AI models, which I think is healthy in certain regards. And obviously, I always worry as well about access to everyone. Wikipedia is free, and I want everybody to have access to knowledge, and sort of putting it behind paywalls so that, I mean, you don't have to be wealthy to afford ChatGPT, but you can't be sort of a very poor person in a developing country and afford ChatGPT. But the good news is, there's no incentive to, have a AI chat product that just gets you super addicted and outraged and engaged in the way that social media has tended to do. I would stop paying for something like that, and if it's free, I think it's probably worth paying for. One that answers my questions in a sensible and calm way. So at least so far, and who knows how this market will develop, there is, we haven't yet seen sort of a viral ChatGPT that's trying to be free and so forth. And in fact, the ones that are free are associated with the search engines, but as part of their search product, which traditionally has been a little more serious than a lot of social products. I don't know the answer. I mean, I think it's fascinating to watch all this unfold. I mean, I think about things, we're just at the very leading beginning of sort of AI generated or AI assisted generation of video content. There's some really cool demos, and there's actually the things that I do see, I think in the wild, are sort of throwing together some images and things like that. But I imagine that YouTube is going to be absolutely inundated with AI generated videos trying to get some ad revenue. And I don't know what I think about that. Some of it's going to be cool and a lot of it's going to be crap. And I don't know how they're going to grapple with that.
I came across an article this week that mentioned that Medium, which is a content platform that rewards creators for clicks and all of that, that was kind of full of AI slop, how people call it nowadays, exactly because of those monetization patterns that exist on Medium.
The place where I expect this to be a real problem. I love to cook, and already there's a handful of really good recipe websites, but there's so many terrible recipe blogs that even the design, these are written by humans, but you can just see the pages they're designed. It's like 4 pages of, well, my husband doesn't like vegetables, but you won't believe he liked this. I just want the recipe, please.
They now have a button of jump to recipe.
Jump to recipe, the sort of one of the greatest buttons ever invented on the internet. But you can imagine that kind of sort of fluffy content that's got a lot of words of no value just to keep you scrolling and seeing more ads. That's quite easy to do with large language models. But if you ask large language models for recipes, I've joked to friends because they're like, "Oh, you use ChatGPT to get a recipe." I'm like, "Yeah, please don't do this unless you actually do know how to cook." I know how to cook, so when the LLM tells me to put in 5 times as much salt as it needs, I'm like, "Well, that seems like a lot of salt." But if you're sort of new to cooking, you might find you've made a disastrous dish. So you don't want a hallucinated dinner, that's for sure.
AI nudging us towards extinction slowly through overconsumption of salt.
Very good.
Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
For joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love all the work you guys are doing. You know, keep going. It's all very super cool. So.
Thank you.
Later. Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Jimmy will leave us, and we will continue just a few more minutes because we have some stuff to talk about, right, Hugo?
I believe so.
Yeah. So I put the slides together. Hugo didn't. I was just making a point. Hugo, I liked a couple of things that Jimmy talked about, and I think we can actually latch on to those as examples throughout this hour, which is that example he gave about his wife, Kate Garvey, actually being married to different people and having almost like different facets. Like there are different Kate Garveys in this
in the latent space,
so to speak. And I thought that was interesting for our purpose, right? Of user market research. We don't want the one Kate Garvey. We're not that it's not that valuable. What we're interested in is the many Kate Garvey. She's going to hate me. I'm going to stop mentioning her name. But we want many instances of that person. And the other thing that I thought was interesting was around the analogy between playing chess as we do right now. We know we have Stockfish, and Stockfish is way better than any of us, period. But we continue to play, right? And so there's this kind of, I wouldn't call it the cozy chess. It's organic chess. It's human chess. And then there's the world of machines where we can no longer compete. What we're really interested in, and we'll see throughout a couple of slides that we have, is really that the game of chess that is played by humans and not by machines. And that's why we're also curious to see how Jimmy connects with this reality, having built Wikipedia, which is community and organic for the most part.
Let me just touch one point that I think was relevant in the conversation that we just had with Jimmy, mainly by contrast with what we do. So Jimmy reinforced a really important aspect that makes Wikipedia so good. It's essentially how they source and how they ground whatever is written on Wikipedia. And the reason why this happens on Wikipedia and why our product can succeed without that and can be helpful and can provide value without that is because in the case of Wikipedia, it's about facts. It's about historical facts, scientific facts. It's about essentially things that are either correct or incorrect, and that there's no ambiguity. And if there's a lot of ambiguity, either it is explicitly mentioned in the Wikipedia article or isn't even included. In our case, what we try is to help our customers and our users understand groups of people better. And when we talk about groups of people, we can talk about, for example, divorced parents, so parents that are no longer together. And there are no facts about divorced parents. It's not that all divorced parents get along really badly or are always fighting. It's not that all of them have X amount of kids. It's more about statistics. It's more about there are commonalities in some cases, in particular cases, those commonalities might not be reflected, but it's more about statistical patterns that people are trying to understand through research. That's why you don't interview just one person, because otherwise you would use that as ground truth, and you know that no single person is a ground truth about any topic or any particular demographic or psychographic. So I think that was the most interesting distinction from what Jimmy was referring as a need and focus of Wikipedia and what we do in our case. In our case, it's mostly about extracting statistical patterns, nuanced ones, and making those available to our customers. In Jimmy's case, it's more of binary choices between truths and non-truths. That was what stayed on my mind from our conversation.
Cool. So we have a few topics to go through, or a few slides to go through to stimulate the conversation. Why we're doing this. What's the state of the industry? Risks. Obviously, I know you guys are very interested in what the risks are. Like if I'm implementing this solution at an enterprise level, that's definitely number one. What are the differentiators right here? Why are we different from our competition? And future, like roadmap. What is it? This is, as Jimmy was putting, this is the worst it will ever be. I keep saying it's a nascent industry. We're at the very beginning, and so everyone's very curious about what's next, right? I think we need to anchor our experience in what we are able to deliver right now, right? It's important to add value early on, but it's also important to notice that there's a vector here pointing to up and to the right. I'm gonna start with this little slide and this is why, right? This is why we're doing this, which is if you're creating products or if you're running marketing campaigns, it's really all about predictability. How do you de-risk whatever it is whatever initiative that you're embarking on? And if we take Clayton Christensen's, he's the author of The Innovator's Dilemma, amongst other books, but he has a Harvard Business Review. I will leave the link here. Article where they basically sum it up to idea to product. It's a 90% fail, right? And I think we can extrapolate to other areas, not just product related, but we see that this is extremely Darwinian, right? And adding one extra point here really means 1 or 2 extra percentage of success. Really starts to tip the balance towards less waste. And towards more productivity, right? So this lies at the core of why we're actually doing this. And then in terms of the problems we're trying to solve more specifically within the user and market research space, it really boils down to, yes, it takes too long, right? That's the number one. It's too, right now, in order to, an enterprise level, an average research initiative will take between 6 weeks and 6 months. I mean, we're talking very long innovation cycles or testing cycles. ChatGPT is too generic. I'm sure most of you are kind of thinking, yeah, that's almost like my number one problem right now. Otherwise, I'd be like all over this. It's definitely still too generic, and that's why we and others like us exist. Hugo doesn't like me mentioning others like us, but we're not alone. Okay. When simulating human behavior, the hard to recruit, it's too expensive. There always leaks when you do organic research. It's difficult to interpret and synthesize or analyze. In this case, in good time, and then we have cross-cultural challenges. So the reason why we started doing this is to solve these problems, right? And we noticed that, look, there are 4 billion people added to this cognitive space since I was born. Obviously, Hugo is older, since probably a few more. There's 5 billion people online right now producing content, and so that just led us to believe, like, not led us to believe, led us to experiment. We have these giant engines, right, that have consumed all of this data. Are we able to predict human behavior using a different architecture, right? Not just prompting. Go, Hugo.
Just to add something here, because on the previous slide, you mentioned content, and the way I look at this, for me, maybe it's just that the word content for me has such a negative connotation of, hey, I'm a content producer, and people churning out articles about stuff that they don't really know about. For me, content in this context, it's something that is a lot more core to what it means to be human. And to give you a concrete example, when my son was born, as every first-time parent, I was kind of lost with a lot of questions, with a lot of, I don't know if I'm doing it right, I don't know if anyone went through it. And as much as I had a lot of support from family, from friends, from my son's mother at the time, there was some stuff that I was ashamed and I didn't want to ask them. I was like, I maybe I should know this. And what I ended up doing is I ended up spending huge amounts of time in a Portuguese forum about parenting. It's called Mãe para Mãe, and I spent too much time there. But the truth is that forum, the human experiences, the real human experiences that people were sharing on that page were essential to me. And this all to say that there are places on the internet, subreddits, forums, a lot of kind of niche communities in which people share their angsts, their desires, their challenges, their aspirations in sometimes a more honest and truthful way than they do with the people closest to them. So this is the kind of content that exists online that was used for training these models that I think makes these models so good at mimicking and reproducing how we feel, how we think, how we experience situations. And that's for me kind of one of the core aspects of the success of a product like ours and products in general around LLMs, is that they were able to consume a little bit of what makes us human through these experiences that are shared across the web. Sorry for this interruption, but it's something that I think sometimes it's easy to forget because we look at the web and we think websites and commercial stuff, and there are places online where people are really people with all their insecurities and all their desires and dreams.
No, that was good. There's this. I don't have many heroes. One of my heroes is a gentleman called Francois Cholet, here in industry. The way Francois Cholet, we can also link to his work. He's been, he's an AI researcher. He's been doing AI since forever, the way he's starting to look at this space we inhabit is as AI right now, or these large language models, as system 1 versus system 2, right? So if you take the thinking fast and slow, so Danny Kahneman's framework, we have in ourselves a system 1, which is very fast, and gives us a very quick reactions, a set of options, right? That you then take to system 2 to kind of rationalize, and that's when the explainability kicks in. Now the issue is that if you look at an LLM as a system 1, as primarily system 1, we're going towards system 2 very quickly, right? But so far it's been very much system 1. Then we're looking at it from a vibes engine perspective. It's really about what Hugo was just mentioning. These little essences, these little, a lot of the times regression to the mean. What's that group doing, right? It's not so much about the individual. It's about getting an average that will that will get you over the line very quickly. And the issue we've noticed is that this S1, this LLM S1, is different from a human S1, right? And that's where we come in, right? Companies like ours, where we're able to look at what is different and start calibrating accordingly. Okay, so we're not that interested in explainability. I think it'll be great, it'll be amazing, but where we are is we're not, like I said, like I mentioned to Jimmy early on. There's this drive towards super intelligence, right? All these kind of stockfish machines playing chess without us, right? That we will never beat, right? Like the whole world is going in that direction, at least, part of it in Northern California. What we need is humanness, right? How do you define humanness? And it's this little slither, right, of the intelligence spectrum. Hugo, interrupt me when you feel like, because we're doing this.
Answering someone here on the chat. So
all good. I have this. We put this up, and this is somebody. It's a study. We'll also link to this. They started out with a survey. Actually, they started out with 506 surveys, ended up with 39 valid surveys. Right. There's a lot of professional panels out there. There's a lot of scammers. Hugo, in a past life working at Prolific, actually was working specifically in this problem. This is, it is the world we inhabit. So there are risks both on the organic side and on the synthetic side, right? On the synthetic side, I guess the biggest issue in everyone's mind is that GPTs are too generic, right? And so what can we do about it? And we're going to do a specific webinar just focusing on this. What we're also having to do with some of you, our clients, is to run more workshops to really get down to the ground truth of what are the methods and techniques that we can deploy right now, not wait for this whole thing to get better, to actually get better results, right? Because you can get better results. So in terms of biases, we'll show you a little further ahead how we're actually dealing with biases, mostly on the shuffle front, shuffling LLMs, but on the how do we go beyond the average? That's a really big one, because we still get a lot of I ran a couple and they were quite, it's kind of, it wasn't really it was quite average. And what the first thing we would say here is we haven't replaced researchers, right? We're trying to replace users here to an extent, right? At least within our tool. And that means as a researcher, you still need to invest time. You still need to probe deeper, right? You need to up that knowledge baseline. You need to ask for extensions. You need to sometimes be contrarian. You need to focus on the gaps. So there are a number of techniques that you need to do in order to get the best out of these tools. Otherwise, it's going to feel very generic, and you'll feel frustrated, and you're just like, oh, whatever, right? Come back when it's just pressing one button, right? But if it's just pressing one button, then the researcher job is at risk as well. So we have to play sensibly here, right? One of the other risks that we also see with some of our clients, namely in the CPG space in different countries, has to do with the fact that, and Hugo will be able to explain this better, but these LLMs, they prioritize training data according to language, right? And so we're seeing a lot less parity, synthetic to organic parity, in some countries that are non-English speaking countries, right? And so we have to, and that's why we developed the RAG tool, the ability for you to upload your content, enrich your synthetic uses with previous studies that you may have, and kind of bring that parity back up. Hugo, do you want to say anything about this?
So yes, it has a lot to do with how explicitly the companies that trained most of these models made a decision in regards to what kind of data was included and not. So what they decided for most of them is that they would try to filter out everything non-English, because particularly in the beginning of this kind of LLM craze, there was this idea that having multi-languages in the corpus for the training could introduce noise that wouldn't be necessarily relevant for the models. And what happens is then when you have countries in which there's little English being spoken or being written online, you end up dropping the parity, because there are some brands, there are some concepts that are so particular to that market but are not discussed online, and so it's hard for the models to pick up the cues they need to be able to deliver good value. But that's essentially what Kwame was saying, is that's why we built RAG. It's to mitigate some of those situations, and in some cases to be able also to allow you to speak to your users even after your user interview is done. So you've run user interviews, you have transcripts. If you upload it on synthetic users, and we use our custom tailored synthetic users, you can then bring those users to life again, and you can even ask follow-up questions to almost the exact same people.
In terms of differentiators, right? What really sets this apart, just to start summing it up. So the fact that certain LLMs have slightly different biases to others, and being able to shuffle is important, as per Hugo's last words, and what I mentioned previously as well. RAG, so the ability to upload content, is becoming. We were a little skeptical at the beginning, right, Hugo? We're like, well, like if like they should be doing it without RAG, right? If it has all of the web, like we should figure out a different architecture. Why do we need to RAG, right?
Yes. Let me just provide everyone a little bit of context. So Kwame was pushing a lot for us to have RAG. RAG is essentially what we were describing: the ability for any of our customers to bring their own data and to use it to enrich and ground the synthetic users. And for a long time, I resisted. Because I was like, no, these models are already quite good, so we don't need that. It's a really complicated system to build. I don't want to be focusing on that. I want to focus on other stuff. I want to go for multi-agent, all of that. And then I ended up running a couple of experiments, and I ended up going into one of our stand-up calls, and I said, Kwame, you were right. I think the results can be really good if you had good data to share, if people have good data to share. I think our results without RAG are pretty good, but I think it makes a difference if you do have that data. So I ended up saying, you were right, Kwame, and I think that's what Kwame wants me to say now.
No, not really, but thank you. Good thing it's recorded. So we have RAG, we have Ocean, and this is kind of to pass the ball over to Hugo with his clinical psychology background. Early on, we had to come up with a way to start creating diversity and differentiating synthetic users. And so having the big five, so also called 5-factor, the Ocean model for personality mapping was actually quite crucial. We are investing more in this, in the sense that we really want there to be more correlation between the psychographic mapping within synthetic users and their normal distribution out there, right? So we're definitely going to invest more in that. And the buzzword in San Francisco and Silicon Valley right now is agentic, right? Everybody's like, agents everywhere. Well, what do you mean agents? And agents are just different ways that make doing what we do much faster and more accurate, right? And this is where we are able to simulate what happens in an organic setting when you sit down with the user. You are strangers in the synthetic setting. So agents are from a user experience perspective, you won't see much of a difference, but from an engineering perspective, from an efficiency perspective, they're just going to be, you're going to have a lot more of these agents running in the background, making everything faster and more accurate. I think that's, not to delve too deep into that. I bring in this this quote, and the reason being is not to call out anyone. Kate is great, but the reaction was very interesting, right? And what Kate was saying here, and Nielsen did write about us, and they did do it was actually fair. It felt fair, to the full disclosure. But that first feeling was one of like, oh, it's more about the method, right? Like as a researcher, I have a method, I have a way that I plan, and the way we come at it, this is not my background. Most of the people doing new industries don't necessarily have that background, and so I don't have those methodologies, right? What we're really interested in is the outcomes, right? It's really more about the outcomes and less about, oh, did you use that agent A versus agent B? Did you do this? Did you do that? That in the space we're inhabiting, that is less important, right? We don't know exactly what's happening inside these LLMs. That's why we have a new branch of science called mechanistic interpretation, right? No one really knows. People are trying to figure it out. So it's not so much a question of how it's actually done, but how do you guys do it? Where do you source that data? The data is the digital footprint of the organic world, right? So we just have, that's it, right? What we're doing is we're taking these nuggets and we're trying to get that humanness, right? We're trying to distill humanity and inject it into these synthetic users. So it's really important that the mindset, and we're starting to see that, like a year ago is no way, right? Now we're really starting to see this mindset driving more towards outcomes. And don't take our word for it. And we keep saying that, right? It's really about you testing this out, try it out, and don't just like, oh yeah, I ran 3 studies and it's not what I want to do. I think this is actually a lot better. Like you need to build that synthetic muscle. I keep going on about the synthetic muscle in my demo calls, but it really is true. It's like compare the two, and it because it's really the only way that we can advance, and then come back and say, oh, that was really crap, or this actually worked, or that it's a joint effort in that respect. Go.
Just one thing. On every demo that me and Kwame do, at least on the first demo, sometimes people ask for more than one, but what I always tell people is, and this, I think it shows how much I trust the product, is in most cases, people have run some research recently. So they have some set of users, a set of customers, some demand space that they're studying, some jobs to be done that they're trying to understand. And they've run interviews, they've run some kind of research to understand and to get insights and to get clarity on that part. And what I tell people is, come and try to reproduce that research with synthetic users. We, of course, don't know what were the outcomes of your study because we haven't run it and we don't even know what it was. But come and run that piece of research with us. Bring us the audience you want to learn about, what kind of people do you want to understand. Bring us your research goal and let us run 10 interviews and then read through the interviews and see for yourself with your own experience how much do the outputs of those interviews match the outputs and the insights from the human interviews you've run. And that I think it's, when I was a kid, there was an ad in Portugal for a cleaning product, and it said that the difference was on the cotton. The guy would clean something and check if it is or not. I think it's the same. That is how you could really know if this works or not. It's not about how many interviews you've run. It's not about how much time you saved. It's not about the price. It's about how much of the information that you learned, useful information that you learned from the organic interviews and the organic studies, could you have leverage in a shorter amount of time with our product?
And I would add one thing. We will write about this. I'm actually thinking of writing a paper. It's this new phenomenon that is recent, and it belongs to synthetic research as an industry, which is when you are sitting down with organic users, right, with humans, and you run 10 interviews, 10 IDIs, in-depth interviews. What happens is you have 10 different people that you talk to, that you empathize with, right? That you see they're different, they're physically different, right? They're in your brain, there will be a couple of favorites. There's a lot going on in that relationship, right? When you're doing that with synthetic users, you just have like the ocean models, and everything's very cold, right? Now, when you run those organic interviews and you start to see overlaps, right? When you then start to analyze, you do topic extraction, you start creating the code books, and you start to infer, right? That's what you do. You infer behavior. When you start to really infer behavior and to see commonalities, you go, oh my God, it's amazing. Look, we found these commonalities. Look, do you see, like, 3 talked about the same thing, roughly, the other one more or less the same. If you do that on that exact same situation in a synthetic context, is perceived as negative. When you start to see, we notice a lot of researchers go through the synthetic research, and when they start to see commonalities, they go, it's just too generic. This is just too generic. Which is, if it was organic, they would be like, oh, this is amazing. Look, we got this, and we got this, we got that, right? It's not there yet in terms.
Everything is obvious once you know the answer. This is the title of a book that from a Microsoft researcher, and this is a phenomenon that I see so much when people try the question. It's like, oh yes, of course it would say that, but if we ask people before they run the study of what they expect the results to be, and I've done this with a couple of friends, they can't guess everything that comes out, but after they read it, it feels like, oh yes, of course, this is obvious, but only because they read it.
Well, this has actually been studied. This is called algorithm bias, but what I was alluding to, but totally. So it's important not to fall into that fallacy, because it's really it could be quite detrimental to what you're trying to do. And then in terms of future, look, we come from a world of prompts. Prompts became, start chaining prompts into flows, and the quality started to increase, the speed definitely started to increase, and now we're going towards agents, right? And so you will start to see these platforms surge up in terms of performance. I wouldn't say that specifically in terms of speed, but definitely in terms of quality, right? And a lot of, like, the diversity that everyone yearns for in the synthetic world, but they take for granted in the organic world. That's definitely it's definitely going to go up now, right? And after we do agents, then we have innovators. I will leave you with this last slide, and that's for Hugo to kind of talk about one of the features that we'll be releasing very, very soon.
Okay.
Obviously, Hugo didn't want to talk about this.
Exactly. This was not supposed to be shared here today. So what Kwame has shown there on the slides is a prototype that I built, because I was discussing this with the team of an idea I had to how to operationalize something around one thing that we're building. So until now, there's some friction in using our platform. We know that no one thinks that this platform is perfect. No one thinks that there's not a huge amount of things to improve. But one of them that really hurts people and hurts me when I'm using the platform myself is that it's not hard to do a lot of it at the same time. So imagine I wanted to study, kids and how kids deal with bullying in school. Of course, I can generate synthetic users that are kids and how they experience bullying. But we know that research involves more than this. So it would probably involve interviewing the kids, interviewing the parents, interviewing teachers, interviewing maybe psychologists who are helping these kids overcome the trauma of bullying. And this is essentially what we're trying to build. Instead of you having to come up with all these segments by yourself and having to open new tabs and set up new studies and all of that, what I want to build and what we're trying to give you as an experience is more of this end-to-end approach in which you bring us the problem. I want to learn about how kids experience bullying, and we suggest this set of studies for you to run, and with one click you can have them all start running, and then you can have a summary that aggregates all these interviews and all the insights from each of these stakeholders that are relevant for this space in one go. And probably it even suggests follow-up studies. So there's this question that wasn't really answered on this set of studies. Why don't we run a follow-up study with kids, but breaking them down by age? Because the experience of bullying between 6 and 12 might be different from 12 and 16. So why don't we go deeper on those differences? Why don't we explore that? So this is what we're building. It's more of a multi-agent approach. And what you're seeing here on the slide is essentially a way that I was prototyping to give you more control over the scope of the study. So let's imagine I want to understand how kids experience bullying, and then you could go for, I want to go more in depth on the individual side or more in depth on the social side. So it would, the suggested studies would vary on this. I'm not committed to this interface. It was just an exploration that we're doing. We do this almost every day, trying to play around with ideas to figure out how to build a product that can serve companies and people who want to create better products that serve humans.
Cool. That's exactly it. I know that we're at time. We only have 3 minutes. I know that there are a number of questions here around how do we evaluate the results and how do we know we're in the right direction. Rohit, I would say what I've said before, and I will continue to do so. It's really, we can show you, how we compare, right? How we do it, and I can point at a comparative study that we've run and the formula that we use to compare in-depth interviews. But at the end of the day, it's really about, you need to do it yourself, right? You need to use something that is that to be true, like Hugo was mentioning, a recent study, something that's top of mind, and you need to compare it with the results, right? Probe a little deeper on the synthetic side so you can increase that parity. But all in all, that's really it. There are no there is no like magical number. No, it's exactly this. For certain topics and certain geographies, parity is going to be slightly higher than in others. But you also have to see, like, you are comparing this with organic, right? Organic, you have to recruit those users. If you run 2 organic studies, right, in-depth interviews out of which you infer behavior, it's and we're talking about social sciences, not exact sciences, right? So I'm very happy to share that link with you, Rohit, after this. But the call out is still the same, or the CTA is still the same. You need to test it out for yourself. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll try and respond to whatever comments are left behind.
Just one final point, which is, I know this is not necessarily talking about our product, but we have a page on our website in which a lot of academic studies, not people who work for us or anything like that, have been comparing how LLMs perform in comparison to humans in a set of different tasks. Most of them psychological tests, some of them more on the cultural side. The cultural compass test just came out yesterday, a new study about how LLMs work on that space. So there's a lot of academic literature that is not influenced by us. So it's, in our case, if we shared something, you might say, oh yes, these guys, they have an interest in showing the best results. There's a lot of academic research now that has been showing shortcomings, where it can be used and how it performs well. And you can access some of those studies in our webpage with links and all. So there's also that important aspect of this.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.